Coming in at number 10, we have Homo heidelbergensis, also known as Heidelberg man. This extinct human ancestor walked the earth about 600,000 years ago in Africa, parts of Asia, and Europe. They are believed to be the direct ancestors of Neanderthals, and some archaeologists even argue that they are archaic or early Neanderthals. Heidelberg man was an exceptionally tall ancient man. They hunted and butchered large prey, and may be the first species of Homo to intentionally bury their dead. I wonder what those funerals must have been like. It was like Gloop Herp was a very fast runner, but he wasn't so fast that he didn't get mauled by a saber-toothed tiger. And now let's move on before the same thing happens to all of us. At number 9, we have Homo rudolphinus. This extinct human ancestor is only known through a small number of fossil bone fragments. There have been some debate on whether or not Rudolphinus is the earliest known member of the Homo genus or is a very late member of the Australopithecus genus. Due to the scant nature of the remains, not much is known about the species, but evidence suggests that the brains were proportionately larger than the other earliest members of the Homo genus. These guys were huge eggheads. No wonder they didn't make it for a very long time. I don't think nerds would have fared well before laws were invented. Well, they did have laws back then. It was just who could punchy punch the bestie best. Next up at number 8 is Java man. This early human was actually made up of 80% coffee, and that's how it got its name. And the reason it went extinct was because it was brewed to death. That's a stupid dad joke. And hopefully you didn't believe that because I just made that up. But this next part is true. In the early 1890s, the tooth and skull cap and thigh bone of an extinct human species were found by a team of archaeologists in East Java. That's what gave this discovery the nickname Java man. It was a big deal at the time, as the bones at that point were the oldest known hominid ever discovered. It was originally argued by some archaeologists that Java man was the ancestor of Homo erectus, but there were some who said that it was the so-called missing link between ape and man. Coming in hot at number 7 on this list is Homo denisova. One of the more recent discoveries of an extinct human species was made in the Denisova cave in Siberia as recent as 2008. Only very few remains have been discovered so far, but thanks to advanced DNA analysis, it has been possible to sequence the genome of Homo denisova. It has been possible to show that some people in Tibet have snippets of Denisovian DNA, the same way that some Europeans have tiny percentages of Neanderthal DNA. Coming in at number 6, we're bringing you Pengu Man. He was made out of clay and his mother beats him with a frying pan, while everyone in his life is extremely volatile. If you don't understand that reference, I feel very sorry for you. Another extinct human found in 2008 was Homo sapiensis. If you can't say that name, just call him the catchier nickname Pengu Man. I struggle with that every single time. Pengu Man's fossilized mandible was discovered by fishermen working near Pengu Islands off the coast of Taiwan. It is extremely thick and has gigantic teeth, which puzzled scientists for several reasons. They were like, how did a creature that didn't have access to a high carb diet and squats get so thick? I'm just kidding on that one. They have been able to determine that it was the mandible of a previously unknown species, and that it was probably very similar to Homo erectus, but larger. It has so far not been possible to date this fossil, so they are not sure when the species was alive, but finding this incredibly strange fossil with very little to compare it to, it is clear that it doesn't exist anymore. Thankfully. We are at the halfway point of this list, and for number 5, we are at Manisi man. Homo georgicus, otherwise known as Manisi man, is a species of extinct human which has been found in Manisi, Georgia. The species has a very small brain, unlike many of our extinct ancestors. The 5 skulls, which are evidence of Homo georgicus, were discovered in 1991, and since then they've been subject to much debate. They may have been an intermediary between Homo erectus and Homo habilis, but there are some scientists who think their skulls are simply examples of Homo erectus. Despite having small brains, the fossils are associated with a total of 73 tools, which proves that a large brain is not always necessary to use tools. Although I would not want to be around the dude who has a small brain and a bunch of tools. He's either going to do a terrible job fixing your car, or he's going to be rooting around your insides before you have the chance to introduce yourself. Coming in at number 4, we have the Red Deer Cave People, the most recently known archaic human to go extinct. The remains of the Red Deer Cave People have been dated approximately 11,500 years ago, meaning they were still around about 28,500 years after the last pure Neanderthal. Some scientists think the Red Deer Cave People were a hybrid of Homo denisova and modern humans, but attempts to sequence their DNA have not proved successful, so it's currently impossible to say for sure. We're finally down to the top 3 here of the most amazing top 10 list of scary extinct human species, and now we have Homo naledi. Evidence of Homo naledi was unearthed in 2013 in a cave in South Africa by cavers who were able to access a chamber in the Rising Star cave system for the very first time. 30 meters down, or 98 38 feet below the surface, it's strewn with thousands of bones which have unique and interesting features, with 1,550 currently excavated and many more remaining in the cave. Some of their features are archaic and resembling specimens from 20 million years ago, but they also have more modern hominid features, and their bones have been dated about 250,000 years ago. It has been concluded that they are not direct ancestors of modern humans. Coming in at number 2 on the list, we have the Hobbit. In 2004, researchers made an announcement that a discovery had been made on the island of Flores, Indonesia. The people on the island had long talked about Ubu Gogo, a race of short-haired hairy men who lived in the caves. Astonishingly, the discovery of stone tools and the remains of a small hominid in the cave on the island seemed to prove the legend right. The official name was Homo floresiensis after the island, but they have become known as the Hobbit. Homo floresiensis was approximately 3.5 feet tall with large feet. The Hobbit had very primitive features and a small brain, like our earliest Australopithecine ancestors, but they were able to use tools and also may have been able to hunt and use fire. Using fire back then must have made you the biggest badass of all time. You could just wave it around and everyone would have thought you were a god, and they would have for sure thought you could just like dance really cool or something like that would go along with the fire. And the moment you've all been waiting for, we are at number 1 on our list, and for number 1 we have the ghost ancestor. A study published in 2019 has shared evidence of yet an undiscovered extinct human ancestor proposed after an AI program determined that there was a ghost population of archaic humans which interbred with modern humans in the distant past. Researchers think the unknown ancestor may have been an offshoot of Homo denisova based on the evidence. With new techniques such as this and advances in fields such as DNA analysis, it is now possible to learn more about extinct species of human than ever before. New species are being discovered and identified with relative frequency, and the earliest discoveries can now be reassessed and analyzed with greater detail. The evidence is pointing not to one unbroken chain of human ancestors, but a rich family tree and a number of offshoots. Exactly how many extinct relatives we have we will probably never know for sure, but with each discovery we are able to add new unique pieces to the puzzle of who we are. But wait, that's not all that we have for you on today's top 10 list, guys. People living today who are in Europe, Asia, and Eurasia have well-defined Neanderthal-derived segments in their genome. These fragments are traces of interbreeding that followed the out-of-Africa human migration dating about 60,000 years ago. They imply that children born with Neanderthal modern human pairings outside of Africa were raised among the modern human and ultimately bred with other humans, explaining how bits of Neanderthal DNA remain in the human genome. The plot thickens. Are previous human species embedded within us somehow? Did we evolve from so-called extinct species that I just presented you with? If you weren't scared listening before, then you might be a little bit scared right now. Coming in at number 10, we have Boskop Man. Boskop Man sounds like a cool dude. Boskop is the nickname you give your buddy who's always late but brings a ton of snacks for everyone. He's like a little bit of a mess but a really cool guy. You're like, hey Boskop, what's up, dude? But the Boskop Man that we're going to be talking about today was actually discovered in 1913 in Boskop, South Africa. Now there has been a little bit of controversy with this fossilized cool dude. At first, everyone was in agreement that this discovery was the remains of an ancient human species that has long since died off. But Boskop Man had a massive amount of cranial space. The sculpture chamber, which held its brain, was 30% larger than our own. Even though these dudes were prehistoric, they had some big old brains. Look at the big brain on Boskop Man. But decades later, new evidence suggested that Boskop Man was actually just an ancestor of modern humans and wasn't a fallen species at all. Since then, that has been the final consensus of Boskop Man's heritage, but if we want to go down the well of crazy conspiracy theories, some people think that Boskop Man's cranial space is evidence of alien-human hybrids. Coming in at number 9, we have Neanderthals. Of all the ancestors that had a shot at being number 1 over us or even coexisting with us, Neanderthals probably had the best shot. Now, just like every other ancient civilization or species, there has been a lot of debate as to where Neanderthals stand in the genetic lineup. Some say that they were a species of their own, and others say that they were a subspecies of Homo sapien. What can be agreed upon is that it seems that we all had the same main ancestor, which we evolved from about 800,000 years ago. There's also a lot of evidence that shows Neanderthals and humans interbred. There are some European people who have Neanderthal DNA, so in a way they live on in us, and they make the people who have that DNA stronger and balder. Apparently Neanderthal DNA can make you shorter, stockier, stronger, and balder. So there is some good and some some bad that comes along with it. Coming in at number 8, we have Homo antecessor. These guys are old as hell. They might have been the oldest Homo sapiens species in Western Europe. They were around when the first stone tools were ever being used. They must have been the coolest dudes in town. You have a group of dudes with the first spear ever. That would be like the first guy walking on the sun. It's thought that these ancestors walked the earth about 1.2 million years ago. The real estate market must have been amazing back then. You could probably get a beachside home for 3 rocks and a tiger tooth. Coming in at number 7 is Homo luanzensis. This extinct human ancestor has gone through a lot of changes over the years, and when I say changes, I mean what scientists have classified them as and whether or not they were even a race of people. Homo luanzensis was given the name U-Bag Man by some, which coincides with the name of a mythical creature that was said to live in the same caves where this ancestor's remains were discovered. It was in the Philippines, and when the bones were first found, local people thought this would give proof to the legend. After close examination, these findings were connected to humans. They weren't an extinct species, but just some of the oldest remains of our ancestors that have ever been discovered. But everyone changed their minds again when more evidence came forward and showed that this species was actually an offshoot of humans and a dead pygmy species. Coming in at number 6, we have Solo Man, Mr. Solo Dolo. No, I'm not going to recite a Kid Cudi song right now, but I will let you know about this extinct human species. Solo Man was found in 1931 in Indonesia, and it wasn't too far from where another extinct species was found, Java Man. At first it was thought that they could have been the same species, but after closer examination it was found that Solo Man had a much larger brain than Java Man, and certain findings suggested that Solo Man had one of the most advanced cultures of that era. They most likely existed in the same era as Homo sapiens, and they might have crossbred with them. I bet this ancestor's advanced culture leaked into our DNA, and that's how we were able to make the Fast and the Furious franchise. Coming in at number 5, we have Homo rhodesianensis. Now let's head over to Africa for this amazing discovery. The samples of Homo rhodesianensis, who was first called the Broken Skull Man, were found in 1921. Now some people think this was just another version of Homo heidelbergensis. Other people state that this is actually a subspecies of Heidelberg man. Final decision on where these guys line up on the genetic table is still unknown, but it can be agreed upon that they are all very dead. They most likely went extinct 100,000 years ago. I wonder what was the deciding factor that made it so our species could work through the fire and the flames and become the most powerful species on the planet, and have others that were so close to us genetically, some with even bigger brains, not able to survive. I think it was our charming good looks. We were able to woo our way into the future. Coming in at number 4, we have Peking Man. Now let's go over to China. Peking Man was discovered in Beijing. I'm surprised it took us this long to get over to China with these discoveries. Peking Man has a little bit of mystery in regards to its classification. The most commonly accepted stance is that it's an offshoot of Homo erectus, and it was alive around 750,000 years ago. Where the remains were discovered, there was a series of tools. This suggested that this ancestor was quite intelligent and likely hunted with stone tools and used stone weaponry. Coming in at number 3, we have Australopithecus africanus. Now let's shoot back over to Africa and go way back in time. We're shooting back in time almost 4 million years. It's thought that this ancestor was one of the first to start walking upright. The discovery was first thought to be that of some sort of ancient ape. There were a lot of similarities in the facial structure and the orbital bones, but there was something very different: the hole in the back of the head, the slot in which the spinal column slides into the skull so everything is connected and the brain can send signals down to the rest of your body. Now on primates, this opening comes in on an angle, but with humans it comes in right from the bottom, meaning that A. africanus walked upright just like us. This could make this one of the oldest extinct human species ever. I would not want to deal with the monstrosities that this human had to deal with. Coming in at number 2 is Australopithecus sediba. This species might have existed alongside of Australopithecus africanus. The oldest dated discovery of this ancestor is 2 million years ago. This guy was wrestling down tigers before Tiger King even had the genetic code to be Tiger King. Because of the time period when this ancestor was walking the earth, it's thought that this could have been the species that evolved into the Homo genus. That is truly amazing. This species would have been the point of evolution where we started to become the people who we are today. We went from barely knowing how to use sticks to kill something to spreading K-pop all over the globe. We are truly amazing. Coming in at number 1, we have Denny. Here's where things are going to get a little bit crazy. What about hybrid humans, when you mix up different species? I mean, we know that this has been happening. We still have people living today with ancient DNA in their bodies. Now, Denny, or Denisova 11, was the body of a 13-year-old girl that seemed to have a mix of two separate species. It's thought that she was a cross between Neanderthals and Denisovians. It would seem that somehow both of Denny's parents were not of the same species, and this brings up a lot of questions as to how these two separate tribes of humans interacted. Was it normal for crossbreeding to take place, or was this just a one-time deal? Perhaps both of her parents were excommunicated from their separate tribes and then ran into each other. Or were Denisovians and Neanderthals always hanging out and chilling and doing cool stuff? Coming in at number 10, we have Homo gontingensis. We are starting off with an ancestor that might have had a smaller brain than most of our other predecessors, but it seemed that this creature was quite resourceful. Homo gontingensis was a species that seemed to have the ability to use fire. It's unknown how it learned this skill. Maybe it was passed down from generation to generation, like we do with driving or watching American Idol. The way that scientists are able to make this assumption is from charred bones that were found along with the fossils of Homo gontingensis. This means that this prehistoric man was cooking its meat before it ate it. Imagine you were the first guy to cook food. You bring a girl over for a date and you're like, hey, you want some charred meat? You are for sure getting a second date. However, it seems from this ancestor's teeth that meat wasn't often on the menu. They had large flat teeth, which are commonly associated with herbivores. It also seemed that Homo gontingensis lived mostly in trees. It might have come down occasionally to hunt or forage for food, but outside of that, trees are where this creature loved to live. Coming in at number 9, we have Homo ergaster. Moving over to Africa now, there's a reason they call Africa the cradle of civilization. It seems that a lot of our ancestors have come from this place, and this is where a good chunk of Homo ergaster's remains were found. Homo ergaster was a transitional ancestor. It seemed to have a weaker bone structure compared to similar species. This would mean that Homo ergaster had started moving into a lifestyle that was less dominated by physical conflict. There's also a lot of evidence that showed Homo ergaster had a more advanced system of social interaction. I mean, they weren't sharing K-pop songs together, but they were gathering in large groups. Who knows what they could have been doing back then? I think it was probably beatbox battling. That's just my highly educated scientific opinion. You don't have to believe me, but I'm on part 3 of this series, so I think I would know. Coming in at number 8 is Homo sorprenensis. This extinct species is extremely interesting because there's so little known about it. Most of the time when a new species is discovered, there's a series of fossils that can be traced back to the same specimen. Sometimes there's even stone tools and evidence as to what their social system looked like. But with this guy, there's none of that. We don't have any info of this old school dude because the only thing that we found was just one skull. It was discovered back in 1994, and since then there has been no discoveries that could be linked back to this guy. It's a lone ranger. Now, how could a skull be found and there be nothing else? Well, there's a good chance that this bad boy was killed by something, and then the skull was taken to another place and then just chucked on the ground after whatever was carrying it was done with it. It's kind of brutal, but back then skulls would have been ripped off of bodies all the time. It was the Stone Age, baby. People ripped your head off as a prank. Coming in at number 7, we have Homo sapien ildautu. This might be one of our closest known ancestors that has died off. This dude was walking around 160,000 years ago, and in terms of life on this planet, that's not that long ago. They would have walked upright, and it seemed that most of them lived in northern Africa. The remains of this ancestor were found in Ethiopia. It's unknown why this species wasn't able to make it into the future with us. One of the fossils discovered had the best preserved skull of any extinct human species, so we have been able to learn a lot about the size of this people's brain and their eating habits. The brain was pretty close to the same size as our own, and it seemed like most of our ancestors, it fed primarily on a vegetarian diet. Coming in at number 6, we have Kennewick Man. What makes the discovery of Kennewick Man so interesting is that he's not that old. Now, this means that he is most likely a direct descendant and not an extinct species, but I wanted to include him on the list because I thought it was super cool. Kennewick Man was found off the coast of the Kennewick River in Colombia and holds a lot of similarities to other Native American people. He has similar bone structure, and it's thought that he could have very similar DNA as well. When he was found, some information about his death was very fascinating. He didn't die from a tiger attack or old age. He had a spear lodged in his hip. That's a good way to die. So that means competing tribes in the area were duking it out over rule of land way back then, before we were even drawing lines about which nations belong to which people. It really makes you think about how long we've been fighting for and how in some ways it's built into our DNA. Coming in number 5 are Australopithecus ramidus. These guys play a very important role helpful in understanding where we come from. Better known as Artie, these are some of the oldest known fossils that can be related to humans. This dude was most likely still covered head to toe in hair like a chimp. Now we would think that is super gross, but back then it was quite stylish. You were warm and comfy all the time. It was like having a free snuggie. They walked the earth about 4.5 million years ago in northern Africa. It's thought that the largest grouping of them would be in present-day Ethiopia. Now, why is Artie so important to knowing more about our genome? Well, because Artie was around at a pivotal moment in our development. 4.5 million years ago was when we were going through a transfer period, when we were going from walking around like an ape to sometimes on two legs. The question is, why did we change? Coming in at number 4 with Paranthropus boyacide. Now let's get a little closer to the modern age. Not that close though. This long lost ancestor was around 1.4 million years ago and was found throughout northern Africa. It's thought that they could have been one of the most dominant versions of humanoid for nearly 1 million years. That's not that bad of a track record. Hopefully we can pull off something similar. Something quite interesting about this ancestor is the mouth, jaw, and teeth, because they were freaking huge compared to a lot of other primates of that time. It's thought that they had a high-fat diet that consisted of nuts and hard shells. That is how they got the nickname nutcracker. This species would use its strong jaws to crack open nut cases that other creatures couldn't get to. Being able to get to high-calorie foods might be why this ancestor was able to be so dominant for so long. Coming in at number 3, we have Sahelanthropus chidensis. Now we are going back in time. This species is a common ancestor for both chimpanzees and humans. It's estimated that this beast walked the earth about 7 million years ago, and it was at this point where our two species split. It would have been two separate groups of primates breaking off that made our two separate species. I think we got the better deal out of this split. Now, why did our species do so much better than chimpanzees? Well, it could have been nutrition or crossbreeding with other ancient species, but the story is still yet to be told. Coming at number 2 is Australopithecus garhi. Alright, we're nearly at number 1, and this guy has locked down the number 2 spot because A. garhi was the first known pre-homo species to use stone tools. That's absolutely incredible. It's thought that they were not primarily used for hunting or combat, but mostly for butchering meat that had already been killed. They most likely walked the earth 2.5 million years ago. They had huge jaws and heads, but brains that weren't much larger than any other Australopithecus that could have existed around that time. It seems that the females of these species were quite large, which could mean that the males and females were the same size. Coming in at number 1 is Australopithecus afarensis. Probably one of the best studied ancestors. The key to unlocking more knowledge about these dead species is fossils, and A. afarensis is one of the species that we have the most fossils of. Through modern discoveries, we have been able to determine that these males were much larger than the females, and there was most likely a constant battle for dominance between males. They competed for land and mates. The females most likely gathered foods for their prehistoric tribes. It's fascinating what we have been able to discover, and when I say we, I mean people much smarter than me who can pronounce big science words. I'm just the messenger who read a few things on the internet.